Is Trevor here? Trevor Loudon? There he is. Okay. Trevor, if you need a moment to set up, or you can use the... okay, fine. Let me introduce Trevor. Trevor is an author, a speaker, a political activist. Trevor is the founder and editor of keywiki.org and trevorloudon.com. Based in Christchurch, New Zealand, otherwise known as Middle Earth to us. He's published 2 books, Barack Obama and the Enemies Within, and his most recent publication, Communist, Socialist, and Progressive in the United States Congress. As you're about to hear, Trevor has great affection for America, and I think what intelligent watchmen from beyond our shores observe about our culture can be very valuable to listen to. So with that, I hope you'll give Trevor Loudon a warm Southern California welcome.
Look, thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Can you understand a real Southern accent? Yeah. Okay, cool. Look, I was in Los Angeles not long ago, and I walked up to a street vendor to buy some food. I paid the money, he gave me the food, and he said, look, you've got an accent. Where are you from? And I said, look, I'm from New Zealand. He said, well, where's that? And I said, well, it's down by Australia. He said, where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from. So, and he hasn't even done Common Core geography yet, people. But I think it illustrates a little bit of a problem that we have, an uninformed electorate. But look, people always ask me, and I've toured this country for 4 years now, probably spoken to 400 audiences, and people always ask me, why do I care about the United States? And I say there are 2 basic reasons. The first is simple gratitude. My country was saved in World War II from invasion by the Imperial Japanese Army by the massive sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway. And that's a very strong memory. Thank you. The second reason is related but a little more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If you lose your freedom, if you lose your constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, the bad guys of this planet, and I'm talking the rulers of Russia and China and Iran and Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela and North Korea and their Islamic allies, and they are allies, people. They will carve up this planet amongst themselves. Now, if you're an ally of America right now, if you're Israel or Germany or Britain, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, you're freaking out right now because you see that the president of this country loves the bad guys of the world a lot more than he loves the good guys. And that's causing big instability, folks. Your allies are looking at you and they are wondering if it is worth being America's friend any longer. They saw what your president did to Poland and the Czech Republic. One of his first acts of office was to cancel the missile shield that was supposed to protect those countries from the Russians. Then they saw him abandon Georgia to the Russians. Then, when there was a genuine rebellion in Iran against the mullahs, the Green Revolution, Obama did nothing and allowed thousands of people to die. And then, when the Communist Party of Egypt and their allies, the Muslim Brotherhood, took out your ally Mubarak, Obama cheered them on. And now they're looking at the Ukraine, folks. I think you need to remember what Napoleon said about the Ukraine. Whoever controls the Ukraine controls Europe. Whoever controls Europe controls the world. These are big stakes we're fighting for here, folks. The Ukraine has a treaty signed in your Senate under Bill Clinton guaranteeing that country American protection from Russian military aggression. They gave up their nuclear arsenal, all of their nuclear weapons, in exchange for an American promise. And now that they need it, folks, where is it? So far, Obama has sent them a few $100 million of non-lethal aid. And John Kerry. Who is John Kerry, folks? He's basically Jane Fonda with less testosterone. So these are serious times, people. You know, this is not about a depression in America, because you're Americans and you'll stand up and you'll fight your way out of a depression. This is not even about losing some of your rights, because you're Americans and you'll stand up and demand them back. But have you ever been in a position before where your commander-in-chief is alienating your allies, empowering your enemies, and gutting your military? Obama has abandoned Reagan's doctrine of peace through strength. And what happens to your peace, folks, when you lose your strength? Do you think Putin would be trying to re-establish the old Soviet empire? Do you think China would be building 400 nuclear submarines right now? Do you think Iran would be threatening Israel in the Middle East? Do you think ISIS would be committing unimaginable atrocities in Syria and Iraq and France? Do you think any of that would be happening today if you had a Reagan in the White House right now? But the world is on the brink of major warfare, folks. Instability is breaking down everywhere because this country has twice elected an anti-American president. And elections have consequences, people. Some people say Obama is just stupid. He doesn't understand foreign policy. He's out of his depth. If he was just stupid, would he not make a mistake in your favor once in a while? People, this is a man who was mentored by a pro-Soviet, and incidentally, I was the guy who first exposed that, the ties between Obama and Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis was a Hawaiian communist who mentored the young Obama, almost certainly a Soviet agent. He was on the FBI security index, meaning he would have been arrested the day that war broke out with the Soviet Union. Obama worked in Chicago. The woman who gave him his first job in politics, Alice Palmer, an Illinois state senator, definitely a Soviet agent, traveled to the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, East Germany on a regular basis, a head of two known Soviet fronts, the World Peace Council and the International Organization of Journalists. Both Frank Marshall Davis and Alice Palmer were peace activists, active in the peace movement. The peace movement has always been controlled by the communists, and its goal has been to gut your military and alienate you from your allies. So basically, their friends in Russia and China can rule this planet. What do you think Frank Marshall Davis and Alice Palmer would think of the job your president has done on your military, people? Obama is cutting your Navy down to pre-World War II levels, your army down to pre-World War I levels. He's cancelling weapon systems right, left and centre. He's blowing off military contractors with thousands of years of experience in their ranks. He's purging generals he doesn't like. He's driving thousands of good officers out of your military with the gay policy, women in combat, and rock-bottom morale. He has done a job on your military that no army on the planet could hope to achieve, folks. And why do you think he's done that? I think the most significant thing, Obama, who has worked with pro-Soviet communists his entire career, has them all around him, like Valerie Jarrett, David Axelrod. He is basically the most significant thing I think your president said in his entire first term of office, when he was caught off mic in South Korea, thought no one was listening, talking to then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Yes, Mr. Medvedev, when I get re-elected, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you. Yes, said Medvedev, I understand. I will pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you. How much more of a warning do you need, guys? How much more blatant does it need to get? This is about the survival of your country. This is about the survival of the West. People say to me, look, if things turn bad in America, I'm going to come down to New Zealand. Well, first you have to have a whole bunch of money, and second, you're going to have to learn Chinese. Because I'll tell you straight, they already control Fiji, they control the Cook Islands, they control Tonga, and they're working on controlling our politicians. If you keep retreating from the Pacific, China, New Zealand and Australia become part of the Chinese empire. Europe becomes part of the Russian empire. China controls Japan, India, etc. Most of Africa is already communist under Chinese control. Most of Latin America is Marxist. Where is that going to leave you people? You think you're going to defend America against an entirely communist Islamic controlled planet? Think you can do that? Maybe Ireland will come to your aid. Maybe Iceland will help you out. Maybe the Italians, if they aren't already conquered, which they are in the process of being right now. See, this is about the survival of the West, people, and we are so close to going down, it is not funny. Now, I want to talk about a little bit about my book. I've got my book out there. We're doing a film. It's coming out in a month. We're going to tour around this country. The book is called The Enemies Within: Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the US Congress. Now, how many of you worry about communism these days, folks? One or two. It's not right up there in most people's agenda, though, is it? Most people worry about the Islamic jihad. That's very much in our faces. But that wouldn't be there without the communists, folks. But the book is really about the two big secrets of modern communism. The first secret, I think they borrowed from the devil, because we all know that the cleverest thing the devil ever did was to convince people he doesn't exist. So what have the communists in this country been telling you in the last 20 years, folks? Pretty much the same thing, right? And for exactly the same reasons. The second big secret of modern communism, which is hardly ever discussed in the thousands of books on the subject, it is the ability of a tiny Marxist party, maybe a few hundred comrades strong. It is their ability to influence and even control the legislative process in their country. In other words, to write the laws. What I'm telling you right now is about 15,000 card-carrying communists in this country are right now writing the laws that control the lives of more than 320 million Americans. A little bit far-fetched, is it not? Well, the mechanism they use, and you should understand this in California, you should understand this right here, because they did it to you right here. The mechanism they use is control of organized labor. Now, you were very lucky in America for a long time because your AFL-CIO, your unions, were run by hardcore anti-communists like Lane Kirkland and George Meany. They kept the Reds out of the unions, folks. But in 1995, a few years after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the communists in this country took over the AFL-CIO. Democratic Socialists of America and the Communist Party USA conquered the AFL-CIO and put their man John Sweeney in as president, and now their protege Richard Trumka runs it for them. They took over every major labour union. They took out the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO's constitution, and they got all of them, SCIU, AFSCME, United Auto Workers, you name it, they run it. And you may say, well, look, the unions aren't what they used to be. They're 11, 12% of the workforce. You tell me this, people. You name me one elected Democrat in this country from county commission to federal level who does not owe his job to the labour unions. For money, for manpower, for get out the vote, even for vote fraud. You tell me one Democrat who's not there because of the unions, folks. So the process is very simple. They took over the unions, and then they used that union muscle to purge all the Democrats that they did not like, the Southern conservatives. Because the Democrats used to be more conservative than the Republicans once, folks. They got rid of the Southern conservatives, the Dixiecrats, the moderates. Joe Lieberman, the senator from Connecticut, was probably the last one to be purged. And now they own that party. 15,000 communists own the unions, and the unions own the Democrats. And they are writing their policies. It's very simple. The communists decide what they want for America. It might be socialisation of student loans, card check, green jobs. It might be a New START treaty with Russia. It might be normalisation of relations with Cuba, which they're just doing now. It might be a nuclear deal with Iran. It might be Obamacare. All of those are communist policies that were made, union policies that were made Democrat policy. Every single one of them, folks. Ever wondered why the Democrats have gone so far to the left in the last 15 years? Because the unions were taken over by the communists, and the communists took over the Democrats. Do you think JFK or Harry Truman would have a chance in today's Democratic Party? Do you think they'd support transgendered bathrooms? Do you think they'd support the crazy things the Democrats are doing now? Not a chance, folks, because the Democrats are now communists, people, under complete communist control. Now, I want to talk about a policy, and I'll give you an example. You're Loretta Sanchez's district, right? She's around here. Loretta Sanchez, well, no, I'll go into that later. The big policy that is going to destroy this country more effectively than any other, if it's allowed to go through, is what they call comprehensive immigration reform, otherwise known as amnesty. Now, amnesty this movement started out in California, Los Angeles, in the 1950s under a Communist Party member named Bert Corona. Big-time communist, big-time Democrat. He was the man who set up the Viva Kennedy clubs back in the 60s, the first organised effort to bring Latinos into the Democratic Party. He also set up, mainly with Saul Alinsky money out of Chicago, a whole network in Southern California and the southern border states of organisations to help encourage illegals across the border. They encouraged them across the border, got them work in factories and farms, and got them settled here, and eventually got them citizenship. Now, Corona trained a whole bunch of disciples acolytes is a better word, to carry on his work for him. 3 of them are very prominent in this state. They have transformed your state, and they are transforming this country. The first one is a man called Antonio Villagrosa. Some of you might have heard of him. Till recently, the mayor of Los Angeles. A hardcore Marxist. He used to go down to Cuba to cut sugarcane for the Castro brothers. He turned Los Angeles into a sanctuary city. He forbade the LAPD from enforcing immigration laws, and the illegals flooded in the hundreds of thousands. Changed the entire demographics of the state. Second member of this group, a Communist Party supporter named Gil Cedillo. until recently the Democratic head of your California State Senate. He is the man who got the DREAM Act pushed through in California a few years ago, and he was behind the recent effort to give driver's licenses to illegals. Third member of this group, the most powerful woman in Southern California, in my opinion, now serves on the Democratic National Committee, a hardcore Marxist. Her name is Maria Elena Durazzo, until recently the head of the California AFL-CIO. She is behind the massive union-driven and union-paid-for Latino registration drives and Get Out the Vote efforts that have added hundreds of thousands of new Latino voters to the California rolls in the last 15 years, almost all of them Democrats. Back to Loretta Sanchez. B1 Bob Dornan used to be the congressman around here, folks, the most conservative congressman in your Congress. The unions targeted Orange County. They worked with the communists, the committees of correspondence, Paul Revere, and they got behind Loretta Sanchez and they got her elected to your district or around here. That was the first of their successful takeovers of this area. Because of what the unions have done by signing, and they did that all through signing up Latinos, mainly illegals, to get them over the margin of victory. It's a complete communist organized program, and Loretta Sanchez is following their agenda 100%. You want to see what she does in Congress on the Armed Services Committee when they hold hearings about Muslim infiltration into your country. You want to see how she works to shut them down, people. You want to see she's been to Cuba twice, had her hand kissed by Fidel Castro's older brother. People, because of this deliberate Marxist program, California, which used to be a reddish, purplish state, is now solidly blue. Every electoral college vote from California, I think it's 276 of them, hugely important in presidential elections, now go straight to the Democrats. A deliberate Marxist program of infiltrating this state with illegals and signing them up to vote has taken this country completely, this state completely under Democratic control, completely. Anyone would argue with that? That's how they did it, people. Now, the man who's leading the movement today on a national scale, he worked in Los Angeles in SCIU, is a man called Eliseo Medina. Now, he was until recently the executive vice president of SCIU. He's a member of Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist. He served on Obama's Latino Advisory Committee with several other Marxists and is a regular at the White House, and Obama claims he consults him on any matters to do with immigration. He is the first person he goes to. Says it on tape, got him on tape. He'll be in my movie, quote him in my book. Well, Medina is the man who got the amnesty bill pushed through your Senate about 3 years ago. He organized his union brothers to get it done. Then he worked with Luis Gutierrez out of Illinois, the Democratic rep from Illinois, to get a bill through the House. Gutierrez is a former member, by the way, of the pro-Cuban Marxist-Leninist Puerto Rican Socialist Party, which doesn't stop him serving on the Intelligence Committee of your House of Representatives, by the way. And but that failed because the Tea Party elected a man called Dave Bratt and took out a man called Eric Cantor, the Republican Speaker of the House, and basically killed, who was a big amnesty man, and killed amnesty stone dead. Killed it. The Republicans were going to pass it on the behest of their big Chamber of Commerce buddies who love cheap labour, but that failed. So when that failed, Medina went straight to the president and demanded executive amnesty. And Obama amnestied 5 million people with a stroke of a pen. Now the question is this. I want to ask a question. Any former or current union members in the room today? Not trying to persecute anybody. I know this is California. Okay. Okay, now here's the question, people. Which organization in the United States 25 years ago was the most hardcore opposed to illegal immigration? Opposed. So unions, AFL-CIO and Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. They had people on the border. They had a program of deliberately turning people into the INS who were illegals. Why? Because they didn't want illegals taking their jobs, lowering their wages and conditions, and breaking their strikes. Very logical. Very logical. The AFL-CIO was constantly lobbying Congress to increase penalties on any employer caught employing illegals. And you know who their biggest champion in the Senate was? The most hardcore anti-illegal immigrant activist in the country? Harry Reid of Nevada. You look him up on C-SPAN. Totally anti-illegal. Totally. But, so in 2016, which organisation is leading the charge to legalise, or just by the way, the woman who organised the program in the AFL, in the Farm Workers Union, to turn illegals into the INS, is now married to Eliseo Medina, the man who's leading the charge to legalise illegals. That's how hypocritical they are, folks. So it is the unions today that are leading the charge to legalise the illegals. SCIU in particular, AFL-CIO. So why were illegals disastrous for union workers 25 years ago and now they're promoting them? The answer is very simple. Before 1995, the unions were there to protect the interests of their members. Since 1995, when they were taken over by the communists, their agenda has changed to promoting Marxist revolution. The illegals are disastrous for union workers, folks, but that doesn't matter because the revolution comes first. The unions are taking their members' money every day and selling their jobs down the river because the revolution comes first, folks. And it took Eliseo Medina 5 years of hardcore lobbying inside the AFL-CIO to get them to flip their policy from anti-illegal to pro-illegal, which he achieved at their national convention in Louisiana in 2000. The Marxists did it, folks. But the big question is this: why does he want it? And why did Obama grant amnesty just before the last election, knowing it would cost him the Senate? Well, Medina let the cat out of the bag at a big Marxist conference in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago. I've got him on tape. I quote him in my book. He's going to be in my movie. He got up in front of the comrades and said this: passing amnesty is the #1 priority of the progressive movement. We have to get citizenship and voting rights for our 11 million undocumented workers. 11 million, it's more likely 20 to 30 million, folks. And did he talk, he said we have to get citizenship and voting rights. And did he talk about compassion, reuniting families, giving immigrants a break, Christian charity, hospitality? Not a single word, folks. All he said was this: in 2008, Latinos voted overwhelmingly for Obama and progressive candidates. If we stand by these people and get them citizenship and voting rights, they will stand with our movement. That will give us at least 8 million more Democratic Party votes. That will give us a governing majority, not just for the next few election cycles, forever. Think about it, people. Mitt Romney lost the last election by 2.5 million votes. You give the Democrats 8, 10, 12, 20 million more votes, what's going to happen? The first thing that happens is that Texas will go blue. And if you take the Electoral College votes from Texas, your second most populous state, and add them to the Electoral College votes of California, which they already got through illegal immigration, do the math, people. It cannot be beaten. That's it. It's a permanent Democratic Party state, controlled by the unions who are controlled by the communists. Why did Obama grant amnesty knowing it would cost them the Senate? Because Obama is a Marxist-Leninist, and Leninism is all about one step backwards to get 2 steps forward. He gave up the Senate, he gave the Republicans their great victory, and he laughed all the way to the bank because he knew that he had just was on the way to securing the one-party state. And if you think this is going to be about America becoming like France or Germany, it's going to be about America becoming like Venezuela pretty quickly and Cuba not long after. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees and Muslim refugees they're going to put in every conservative community in your country. I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota recently, Michelle Bachmann's old district, most conservative part of Minnesota, 60,000 people in that town, folks. 20,000 of them are Somali Muslim refugees. What do you think that's doing to that town, people? What do you think that's doing to the hospitals, the schools, the property values? But what is it going to do to their voting base when they all get citizenship and SEIU buses them all to the polls to vote Democrat? What do you think it's going to do, folks? And they're going to do that to every conservative community in your country if they get another chance at this. That's the reality. You don't have 20 years to muck around, people. You've got one election cycle left to save this country. Because if they get in again, they are going to keep those southern borders open. They're going to flood your country with refugees, and you are going to be a permanent minority in your country. And if you think you can sit in your churches and hide away from it all, you wait and see, people, because they are coming after you and coming after you hard. Just want to talk a little bit about the individuals here, because my book and my movie are going to be about the individuals. They're going to be about the Loretta Sanchez's and the Barbara Lees and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Barbara Boxers and the Dianne Feinsteins and all the other communist politicians you have in this state and across this country. But I want to ask you a little simple question. Anybody in this room, not counting military, has ever applied for a federal government job who is willing to admit it? You're good private sector people here, are you? Look, one or two of you, okay. Well, did any of you people ever need any form of FBI security clearance for your positions? That lady did, the lady here. Well, is it true they can be pretty tough? They go through your underwear drawers. They check out your family background, your overseas travel, criminal convictions. I had a friend who applied for a federal government job out of Virginia not long ago. The FBI sent 2 FBI agents all the way to Canada to interview this man's communist uncle. And on the strength of that interview, my friend, a good conservative, was denied that job. And I support that, you know, because this is a federal government here. This is the heart of the free world. Every Western country depends on America being safe and secure. And you have enemies out there who have a history of using your weak and dishonest to betray you. And what is your constitution? Well, what is more dangerous, people? An enemy outside or an enemy inside? What does your constitution tell you to do? To guard your constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. They didn't say that for nothing, people. So, you imagine you're a young communist, pro-communist person, hangs around with the local unions. They're controlled by the communists, like Loretta Sanchez, like Linda Sanchez, like Mark Takano, like Raul Ruiz, like Nancy Pelosi, at least 30 in your state. And they control the local unions, and they control the local Democrats, and they can get you elected. And you can go into Congress as a liberal Democrat or even a moderate Democrat, like Loretta Sanchez pretends to be, or even your Senate. And there you may serve on the Science and Technology Committee, or the Homeland Security Committee, or the Judiciary Committee, or the Armed Services Committee, or even the Intelligence Committee, like Luis Gutierrez, and like Andre Carson from Indiana, who has extensive ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. And you may have access to all sorts of government secrets and the ability to influence your government policy in directions favourable to your enemies. How much of an FBI security check does that one take, folks? Nothing. Because the people are supposed to vet the candidates, right? And the media is supposed to help you do it, right? Well, how's that working out, guys? What happens if the media is on their side? What happens then, people? So if you're a foreign intelligence officer, say, serving in the United Nations, which has hundreds of them, under diplomatic cover, working for Iran or Cuba or Venezuela or North Korea or Russia and China, and you have networks in the communist parties of this country and the labour movement who have the ability to elect their secret members and their secret sympathisers into your Congress or your Senate, where they can help your enemies, do you think you're, with no security checks, do you think your enemies are so stupid and lazy they do not exploit that massive hole in your national security? If you're a Cuban intelligence officer and you serve in the United States for 10 years and you mix with congressmen all the time and they come to your events and they're involved with the unions and they're involved with the local communists, but you don't recruit them, and you go back to Cuba and they say, well, how many congressmen did you recruit? It's so easy. And you say none. What do you think is going to happen to you people? You're going to get a fat pension and a pat on the back? People, your Congress and Senate are wide open. Wide open. I quote in my book Raul Castro, the Cuban communist dictator, talking about how he, in the Cuban Communist Party newspaper, boasting about he works with members of your Congressional Black Caucus, which was set up by the Cubans, you know, Maxine Waters, Barbara Lee, Karen Bass, all communists, who go down to Cuba on a regular basis to talk to them how they're going to work inside your Congress to get trade and travel restrictions lifted on Cuba. And remember why they got those restrictions put on them, folks. Back in the early 60s, the Cubans tried to bomb Macy's in New York City on New Year's Eve. They were going to kill thousands of Americans, and the FBI just stopped them. They've been exporting drugs and terrorists to your country ever since, people. Now, basically, Obama is about to lift those sanctions. Now the Cubans are going to be able to send more drugs and more spies and more terrorists to your country at will. They're going to start more LA riots. Remember that one, people? They were heavily involved in that. More Fergusons and more Baltimores. They're going to do it on a huge scale, folks, because your government is now letting them in to do it. What do you call it when congressmen go from your country to an enemy foreign country to help them against you? And what's the penalty for that one, folks? So why is it happening every day and nobody does a darn thing about it, folks? It's been going on for a while too. Any Vietnam veterans in the room here today? One, two, couple. Well, I knew there'd be one or two. Well, the first thing I say, gentlemen, is thank you. Then I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One of them is very stupid, but I think you'll see where I'm going. First one, was the Vietnam War lost in the jungles of Vietnam? Okay. Is it true that you had some pretty tough rules of engagement? You weren't allowed to bomb Hanoi Harbour. You weren't allowed to return fire sometimes without asking permission. couldn't chase the enemy across borders in hot pursuit, weren't allowed to even occupy territory sometimes, had to allow the enemy to re-infiltrate, weren't really allowed to fight that war to win. Is any of that true? Okay. And had you been allowed to fight that war to actually win it, like you were in World War II, to take the fight to the heart of the enemy, could you have won it, and pretty darn quickly? Okay. Is it also true that when you withdrew, your Congress defunded the South Vietnamese military, guaranteeing a communist takeover? Okay. Well, you lost 58,000 men in that war, folks. 100,000 wounded. 58,000 of your church members, your high school buddies, your cousins, your uncles. 58,000 Americans. I guarantee every person in this room was touched by that war in some way. Not to mention the hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese, many of them survivors living around here, who were tortured and shot and imprisoned after the communist takeover. You ask them what it was like. Well, I say this, that war was deliberately sabotaged in your Congress by people like Father Drinan, the congressman from Massachusetts, who are working hand in glove with the Communist Party USA, which was taking its orders directly from the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was allied to the Communist Party of North Vietnam. Do you think there might have been a little bit of treason going on there, folks? And how many of those traitors who condemned tens of thousands of your boys to completely unnecessary deaths, how many of them paid a single penalty for what they did, folks? One of them is now your Secretary of State. And he's doing it to you all over again, folks, with this nuclear deal with Iran. And what about John Conyers? How long's he been in Congress now? 140, 160 years? He is the most powerful Democrat in your Congress, people. More powerful than Nancy Pelosi. Bumbling old fool that he is. Because he heads, well, when the Democrats are in power, which have been most of the last 20 years, he has headed the Judiciary Committee, the body that writes your laws, the most powerful body in your Congress. It is also the body that oversees the Federal Bureau of Investigation and sets its budget. Which organisation is supposed to be rooting the traitors out of your government, folks? The FBI. So John Conyers has got a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, attended their founding conference, was still at their conferences in 2013. He's got a 20-year history with the Workers' World Party, which supports North Korea, Cuba, and Iran, and has got extensive ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. John Conyers is a hardcore anti-American Marxist-Leninist. As hardcore as you can get, folks. Yet he oversees the budget of the FBI. So what do you think's going to happen to the FBI if they ever come after John Conyers or Loretta Sanchez or Barbara Boxer or Barbara Lee? What's going to happen to their budget, folks? Do you think they're going to bite the hand that feeds them? What about Judy Chu from not far away from here? One of your top California congressmen, head of the Asia Pacific Caucus, which is very pro-Chinese. Back in 1979, the Communist Workers' Party, a hardcore Maoist outfit in Greensboro, North Carolina, they were organizing the black factory workers in the textile mills. They provoked the local Ku Klux Klan into a street gun battle. Both sides were armed. It's on tape. Look it up. You can look it up and Google it. See it happening. The Greensboro Massacre. When the dust settled, 5 people lay dead in the streets, folks. Pretty extreme, don't you think? After that, the Communist Workers' Party changed their name to the New Democratic Movement, and they deliberately set about infiltrating the Democratic Party. They had a front called the Federation for Progress, and Judy Chu headed that front. She worked with several Communist Workers' Party members, getting her elected to local positions in the San Gabriel Valley. And she eventually got into Congress, where she's still working with Communist Workers' Party members. And now she's one of your top Congress members. She goes to China all the time to build business ties between China and California, and the Chinese press describes her as China's representative in your Congress. She serves on the Judiciary Committee with John Conyers. And you want to see Judy Chu whenever the FBI has the temerity to arrest one of the thousands of Chinese spies working in your state, let alone the country. You want to see Judy Chu go after the FBI folks to shut them down. You want to see Judy Chu give them a hard time. You want to see Loretta Sanchez go after them when they get onto the Muslim Brotherhood. You have got at least 100 members of your House and 20 members of your Senate who are so enmeshed in neo-communism or Muslim Brotherhood fronts, they wouldn't have a chance of passing an FBI security check to sell you postage stamps at the post office. They would not be allowed to clean the toilets at any military base in your country. And neither would your president, by the way. Yet they are serving on the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Education Committee, the Environment Committee. Everybody of your Congress and Senate is penetrated by avowed enemies of your country, folks. Do you think the Russians would tolerate 100 pro-Americans in their Duma? Do you think the Cubans would tolerate 100 pro-Americans in their parliament? People, I don't want to depress you with any of that. But I do want to impart upon you the absolute urgency of winning this election, folks. The absolute urgency of it. Because if you don't, they are going to flood your country with illegals and foreign refugees until the point you have no hope of ever ousting them from power. You think they wouldn't do that? So you have got a few months left. And I'll put it bluntly, it hasn't gone well for our side at all. It's been a disaster. And we're getting urged right now, I don't know what your allegiances are, we're getting told right now we've got to get behind Donald Trump because you've got to keep the Democrats out. Donald Trump is basically being manipulated by 3 or 4 people around him who are pro-Russian. They love Mr. Putin. That is why Mr. Trump is saying we've got to back off NATO. We've got to be ambivalent on Israel. So that's a problem. So if he's going to be the Republican nominee, he has got to be told in no uncertain terms that he gets no backing from conservatives until he gets rid of his pro-Russian advisors, till he gives us a slate of his Supreme Court nominees, and every one of them better be a full-on conservative, people. Every one of them better be a good one, or he gets no further backing. He's got his name as VP, and it better not be a Democrat, as he's been talking about. And he's got to name his cabinet. And he's got to tell us who he's going to appoint, and every one of them better be a darn good pro-American conservative. Because I'll tell you straight, if he does not do that, he is no better than the opposition. So what I'm saying is right now, if the president sees a problem, we got to defeat the Democrats, but it's got to be on our terms. If you have a wife who's been abused by a husband for several years, and he says, I want to reform, and she says, I'm going to leave you, and you say, And the wife says, and the husband says, look, I'm going to reform. I'm going to change my ways. No more drinking, no more beating you up, nothing like that. And she says, oh, okay, that's great. You can stay. What do you think's going to happen? But if she says, right, you got a year, one bit of violence, one episode of drinking, one anything you let me down, that's it. But I'll give you a year's probation. I'll give you a chance. You think that's going to have more chance of success? Well, right now, you've got a candidate who's been abusing the Conservative base pretty harshly for a while. He has got to have a period of probation. He does not get our automatic support, and he's got to prove he is worthy of it. Is that a logical proposition? Is that a fair proposition? Tell us who your Supreme Court nominees are going to be. And they better be all for religious freedom and all for the Second Amendment, because if there's any weak ones in there, that's it for you. You've got to tell us your VP. And he or she better be a darn good conservative and a darn good patriot. And you've got to get rid of your pro-Russian advisors. And you've got to tell us your cabinet. And then maybe you'll get a chance. Maybe you'll get our support. Why do the blacks in this country get ripped off totally by the Democrats, folks? Because the blacks are automatic Democratic voters. Why would they get anything? They're going to vote Democrat anyway. Why not just betray them? Why not sell their jobs out with illegal immigrants? But if the black population said, we might vote Republican, we might vote Democrat, you've got to give us a good deal. Well, right now, conservatives, patriots are faced with the proposition of two people fighting for the presidency. Hillary Clinton, who is a totally Marxist criminal, or Donald Trump, who has got a few issues. Okay? So Mr. Trump has got to prove to our side that he is worthy of our support. It should not be granted automatically. Can anybody think that's a wrong strategy? You've got to tell him, maybe we'll support you, but these are the conditions. Because he cannot win without those 20% of conservatives who do not want him. He cannot win without it. If he wants to win, you've got to hold his feet to the fire. So that's my advice. You can take it or leave it. I can't even vote here, folks. But I tell you what, my children's future depends on what you do. Your children's future depends on what you do. The whole Western world depends on what you do in this election, folks. I don't want to put a big responsibility trip on you, but as William said, you are chosen for this time. And this is not an easy time. I'm not telling you it is, but it's a great time, because this is a time where you must search your souls, and you must strengthen your principles, and you must look into your conscience and stand by what you know is right. There's never been a time like this since the first American Revolution. We're either on the verge of the destruction of the Republic or a second surge of America. Because I'll tell you what, Reagan had a big base, and look what he did. But you look at what Glenn Beck and the Tea Party movement and Mark Levin have done to educate, and the churches have done to educate Americans in the Constitution in the last few years. It was a phone box movement 10 years ago. Now there's hundreds of thousands of people. I've spoken in 43 of the 57 states of this country, folks. Seeing who's awake. Wake up, people. And I tell you, there's a grassroots awakening of people who understand how vital this country is. They understand the Constitution is vital to your survival and everybody's survival. They understand that this country was not created as a Hindu country or a Muslim country or a Buddhist country. It is free because it's a Christian country, people. So as William said, this is the time to make a stand. You got the Senate. One vital thing is we have to hold the Senate. So if you don't like the presidential candidate, pick out a senator, a conservative senator from somewhere around this country and get on his team, phone bank for him, send him some money, because no matter who is the candidate, President Hillary or Donald or whatever, or I think it's actually going to be Joe Biden running with Elizabeth Warren, by the way. Whoever it is, we have to hold the Senate, because then we can keep them in check. So if you don't want to back a presidential candidate, work on the Senate, because that is our backstop. And if you do want to support a presidential candidate, you hold their feet to the fire and withhold your support until they show you they are worthy of it. So I want to say to you, I've got my books out the back. I've got a bit of paper where our movie's coming out, The Enemy's Within, in a few weeks. If you want to hear about the progress of that, it's going to be in theatres around the country. Please sign our little paper out there on the stand. My wife, Victoria, will take your email address. But most of all, I just want to say to you that I am so grateful that people like you are doing what you're doing. I'd be wasting my time if people like you were not standing up for what you believe in, folks. So I'm so grateful to be invited to speak to you and so proud to be amongst you. Thank you so much. God bless you all, and God bless America. Thank you.